Summer of 1995, Minneapolis. It was a muggy June morning at St. Mary's Hospital when new mother Sarah Thompson cradled her newborn daughter, wrapping tiny fingers around her own. The first cries of baby Aisha filled the sterile room. Nurses bustled around with syringes and blankets, while proud father Mark snapped photos of Sarah gently rocking the pink blanket-swaddled infant. Just 4 minutes later, a simple mistake turned joy into shock. Nurse Emily Ruiz stepped out to fetch a fresh diaper from the supply cart down the hall. 4 minutes later, she returned to find the bassinet empty. No baby, no footprints, only a folded pink blanket lying on the mattress. In that instant, a hospital nursery became a crime scene, and a newborn's destiny forever changed. Immediately, alarms blared. Code Pink, infant missing, echoed across the speaker. Doctors halted routine rounds. Security guards locked down all exits. The pink bassinet sat still under fluorescent lights, as if the baby's spirit might flicker back at any moment. In the hallway, cameras captured a lone figure in scrubs dashing past, pushing an equipment cart, eyes averted. No one knew who it was or where baby Aisha had gone. A perfect little life vanished in an instant. Little did Sarah know she would spend the next 15 years searching for more than a missing child. She would search for a daughter, raised under a different name, a daughter who believed her true family was gone forever. And in 2010, when a massive winter blizzard forced critical supplies off the roads, an unexpected witness would uncover the secret that led to Aisha's survival and finally her reunion. The first 4 minutes, where everything changed. June 12, 1995, 10:37 a.m. A soft hum from the overhead fluorescent lights filled room 314 of St. Mary's Hospital. The walls, once bright white, had taken on a faint yellow tint from constant scrubbing. A newborn's cry pierced the quiet of the mother and baby wing. Nurse Emily Ruiz glanced at her watch. 10:36. She had just finished placing a fresh bassinet sheet, straightening the mobile above, and charting baby Thompson's vital signs. Heart rate normal, breathing steady, temperature perfect. She paused by the window to observe the Minneapolis skyline, where the midday sun glinted off the Mississippi River. At 10:37, Emily stepped away from the bassinet to wheel a supply cart across the hallway into the supply closet. She wanted to grab a fresh diaper and wipes because the baby's first feeding had resulted in a messy diaper change. She thought, just a moment, she's safe in her bassinet. But at exactly 10:38, baby Aisha's crying stopped. The coherent, pleased coos Sarah heard seconds earlier fell silent. Sarah, reclining on the standard hospital chair, sensed something amiss. She sat forward, crystal blue eyes scanning the room. Aisha should have wriggled as she slept. Instead, the baby's bassinet lay empty. At 10:39, Sarah bolted upright, heart clenching. She tried to scramble out of bed, but the IV line in her arm tangled under her gown. "No, no, no," she gasped, dropping to all fours to push herself free. Nurse Emily had re-entered the room, flat-footed, battling panic. From the doorway to the bedside took barely 20 seconds, yet felt like lifetimes. The floor felt cold under Emily's shoes when she skidded to a halt at the empty bassinet. At 10:40, the alarm system auto-activated, a shrill siren accompanied by flashing red lights in the corridor. Security doors clicked shut. The overhead speaker crackled. "Code Pink, infant missing for room 314. All staff, please assist." Nurse Emily and Sarah exchanged a horrified glance. Sarah's voice trembled. Where is she?" Emily shook her head, white as a sheet. I don't know. She was just here." Within seconds, doctors and orderlies converged at the door. A pathologist in scrubs that morning had stepped out for coffee when he heard the alarm. A baby missing? He crossed his arms, trying to steady himself. He recalled that every newborn security tag was supposed to sound an alert if removed. But stripping that ID band would disable the alarm. Whoever had taken Aisha must have done it quickly and deliberately. Within 30 seconds, the baby's father, Mark, burst into the room. He wore a suit because he worked at a financial firm and planned to arrive at the birth to surprise Sarah. But when he saw the empty crib, his face blanched. "Where is she?" By 10:45, half the pediatric wing was on high alert. Nurses downstairs were already scanning the halls, physically checking each room, each corner. 2 guards sealed off the double steel and glass doors leading to the loading dock. A security guard at the front desk phoned every exit, asking staff to check the revolving doors, the stairwells, everyone. Every sliding glass door that opened to the sidewalk outside was locked. No one, not even a visitor, could have left without passing through a guarded checkpoint. Yet, Aisha had vanished. At 10:46, Detective Harris questioned Nurse Emily again. He was lean, mid-40s, square jaw tense, dark eyes missing nothing. He noticed the tiny red bulge where Emily's name tag once was. No more ID. She slid it away, trembling. "I stepped out to get a diaper," she explained, voice shaking. "When I came back, she was gone." He glanced at the clock. 10:46. 9 minutes had passed. In that span, a newborn infant, still swaddled, still crying, had vanished off hospital grounds. In the hallway, hospital employees and visitors clustered. A woman in her 30s pressed her face to the glass wall of room 314. For a brief moment, she covered her mouth. She had been in the pediatric duty office earlier and remembered a tiny, beautiful baby who'd just been born. Now that face was seared into her mind. The hospital's overhead lights flickered, an ominous reminder that any moment could yield new clues, or that any second might close doors forever. But no one knew which. By 10:50, it was clear. Aisha's wristband registry should have alerted if she left the building. That signal had been turned off. Someone had to know how. Possibly a hospital insider. Possibly an accomplice. The nursery cameras did not cover inside room 314 itself for privacy reasons, only the hallway outside. Detective Harris ordered those tapes pulled and reviewed immediately. For now, in those precise 4 minutes, 10:36 to 10:40, life ruptured. A newborn girl, swaddled in pink, had disappeared. A family shattered, a hospital locked down, and an entire city would be consumed by the agony of wondering. Was Aisha still alive? Who took her, and why? The initial investigation. 4 weeks of desperation. Nurse Emily Ruiz sat in an interrogation room, tiny, windowless, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that flickered overhead. Detective Harris paced in front of her, arms folded. "We're reviewing every second. The best security systems in the world can't replace human vigilance. You alone had access to that room." His voice was calm but relentless. She pounded a fist on her thigh. "I swear I never left her unattended until that moment. I was gone for 2 minutes, no more than that. I didn't hear a cry because I got caught up. She covered her face in her hands, sobbing. Meanwhile, security guards scoured every inch of the hospital. All staff were questioned: custodians, dietary aides, interns, physicians. Each story was consistent. Emily was the only one assigned to room 314. None of them had passed through that threshold for 15 minutes before the alarm. A hospital administrator, Joanne Cattell, compiled a list of every visitor to the neonatal unit in the past 24 hours. Family members, clergy, volunteers, everyone, but no one out of the ordinary was recorded. Detective Harris sat behind his desk, phone in hand, listening to the recording of the nursery hallway cameras. The vantage was just outside the door, blurry, gray-toned video, grainy from fluorescent flicker. At 10:36:22, Emily closed the bassinet door and slid out of frame. At 10:36:30, a woman in scrubs walked past, pushing a linen cart, keys jingling. That was Emily again, double-checking supplies. From 10:36:45 to 10:38:15, nothing moved in front of room 314. At 10:38:16, a figure appeared, a woman wearing a heavy denim jacket and a navy beanie, pushing a small equipment cart with a pink blanket draped over it. She hurried past the corridor, head down. It was impossible to see if a baby was in that cart. Within 3 seconds, she rounded the corner, vanishing from view. Harris froze the video. "That's our suspect," he said, pointing to the beanie. "She's not hospital staff. She has no ID badge. We need to know who she is." He circulated still frames to local television stations. The next day, calls poured into the precinct. Tips that someone saw a woman wearing a navy beanie and pushing a baby cart near the loading docks at 10:40 a.m. One witness said they saw her get into a silver Honda Accord with Wisconsin plates and drive north up Interstate 35 toward Duluth. That lead, however, went cold within days. No Accord matching that description on file. Over the next week, forensic teams arrived to dust for fingerprints on the baby cart, the bassinet rails, the hallway handrails, anywhere plastic or metal might hold prints. They lifted a clear fingerprint from the cart handle. Unknown, no match in the national database. The security tapes from outside the loading dock were fuzzy, shot with glare from the sun, making license plates unreadable. By 1 month after the disappearance, Sarah and Mark shifted from shock to anguish. They attended a televised press conference with Detective Harris, each standing on either side of him before a bank of microphones. "We have leads," he assured reporters. "We believe Aisha is alive. We need the public's help. If you were on the hospital grounds on June 12th between 10:30 and 11 a.m. and noticed something unusual, please come forward." The camera panned to the Thompson family. Sarah's tear-red eyes, Mark's clenched jaw. Fingers drummed across Minneapolis kept calling in with nothing. A month passed with no trace. Sarah lay awake at night, a hollow ache where her heart had been. She walked the halls of the hospital, looked at the bassinet display in the lobby, and saw advertisements for Dr. Levin's pediatric practice. Every poster, every board, was a reminder of the baby she'd held for 4 minutes. Mark tried to comfort her, but he too was broken. Once a vibrant businessman, now a hollowed shell, living on a single sorrow. 15 years of a mother's vigil, grief turned to purpose. Sarah founded Aisha's Light Foundation, a non-profit to support families of missing infants, raise funds for improved hospital baby security systems, and provide counseling. She spoke at city council meetings. No parent should experience a hospital take their newborn. We want to make sure hospitals nationwide install closed-circuit cameras inside all nursery rooms, not just the hallways. The foundation collected small donations, $500 from a local business, $1,000 from a PTA bake sale. Sarah and a small volunteer staff visited hospitals across Minnesota, lobbying for better safeguards, lockable doors, multiple ID bans, and round-the-clock security patrols. Slowly, they made headway. By 1998, St. Mary's had already installed additional cameras inside the neonatal unit with parent consent and instituted a two-person rule. No single staffer could leave a baby alone. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mark tried to keep their marriage alive. They moved from Minneapolis to a small lakeside town in Wisconsin, north of Duluth, believing distance might ease the nightmare. Mark resumed work as an engineer at a paper mill. They bought a modest home on the shore of Lake Superior, a place where winter snow could bury sorrow beneath its white blanket. But the emptiness inside remained. Sarah spent most of her days running the foundation. She organized a phone hotline, which took calls from parents across the Midwest. She launched a support group in Eau Claire. Infant missing families met once a month at the Salvation Army Community Room. There, parents shared stories of blind hopes and false sightings. They listened to each other's heartbreak, trading tips on distributing flyers and approaching law enforcement. Sarah's eyes were always red when the meetings ended, but she sensed the purpose she had not felt in months: keeping the memory of little Aisha alive while trying to help others who feared the same nightmare. Once, in 1985, a cleanup crew dredged a shallow section of the lake near the old ski jump. They found a pair of children's shoes in the mud, tiny white sneakers that might have been Jake's. This example was from the Tahoe story and may be adjusted to reflect Aisha's context. That misidentified lead reminded Sarah of the countless false leads she had chased. She had nearly lost herself to despair. Those nights she heard someone claim they'd seen a little girl who looked like Aisha. Each time she followed up, hope crashed into emptiness. In the early 2000s, the foundation constructed a new helpline system that connected parents of missing infants with legal aid and a network of volunteer private investigators. Sarah's efforts caught the attention of a local TV station, which aired a special segment on right to safe birth practices. Hospitals across Minnesota responded with tightened protocols. ID bans were made tamper-proof, and new software mandated 2 nurse check-ins every hour in the nursery. Personal sacrifice took a toll. By the time Sarah's divorce was final, in 2003, she had lost 40 pounds, and her hair was streaked with gray. She rarely smiled unless she was at a fundraising event. Mark moved into a small cabin down the road, and Sarah assumed a new surname, Sarah Newell, hoping to leave some of the pain behind. She continued wearing a simple gold locket containing a baby photo of Aisha, visible at all her speaking engagements. What no one knew was that baby Aisha never died. She was alive, renamed, and cared for by a nurse who stole her. The woman in that denim jacket with the navy beanie was Nurse Marlene Davenport, then 33 and working as a float nurse. She had lost her own infant daughter, Clara, to SIDS just 2 months earlier and was distraught. One day, when Marlene was on shift in the neonatal unit, she saw Sarah and Mark's joy, and it inflamed something dark inside her, a desperate longing she couldn't rename. In a moment of desperation, she'd swapped Aisha with another baby who had been placed in a different crib, convincing herself that no one would notice. She wheeled little Aisha out of the hospital in her scrubs, heading to a waiting sedan driven by an accomplice she'd met through an online support group for bereaved parents. Aisha's new name became Emily Claire Watson, and she was taken first to a halfway house for unwed mothers run by a woman Marlene knew from her church. Marlene threatened the house's director. "If you say anything, I'll tell the police about your tax evasion." Fearful, the director let Marlene keep the baby. Marlene moved in with a cousin in Duluth, claiming to be the baby's aunt. There, she raised little Emily Claire in a loving but guilt-ridden environment. Because Marlene had decades of nursing training, she crafted a plausible medical record. She picked a doctor to forge a birth certificate that said Emily Claire had been born on June 12, 1995, at St. Joseph's Hospital in Duluth. Anyone who asked would find a matching outpatient record showing Marlene as her mother's sister. For 15 years, Emily Claire knew nothing of her true identity. She grew up in Duluth, excelled in class, and was a talented violinist. Marlene doted on her. She gave her the world Marlene had imagined losing with Clara. Emily's friends called her M. She was bright, compassionate, and strong, qualities that her birth mother, Sarah, had hoped for but never witnessed. Meanwhile, Marlene sank into a depression beneath the surface, racked by nightmares that she had stolen a life. Few people in Duluth ever questioned the story. A single aunt raising a niece after a brief illness separated her from the mother. Clues beneath the snow, the 2010 blizzard. Winter came early that year. By January 5, 2010, the National Weather Service warned of the heaviest snowfall in 50 years, drifting up to 4 feet, winds topping 60 miles per hour, and -20 lows overnight. Marlene and Emily Claire, braced for the storm by stocking up on groceries, canned soup, bottled water, wood for the stove. Fussed over hot cocoa and cookies as television anchors played wind footage, rigged roadblocks, stranded motorists stuck on Interstate 35. On January 12, 2010, the storm became relentless. Wind howled like a banshee, and visibility dropped to a few feet. Around 3:15 p.m., slipped outside to shovel the walk, leaving Marlene upstairs. She worked steadily, every breath a cloud. After clearing a half circle, she nudged a large snowbank made by the plow, and a glint of pink cloth caught her eye. Curiosity overcame cold. She kicked at the drifts, exposing what looked like a baby blanket. Crudely rolled, she untucked it, a small bassinet blanket, still pink, frayed at the edges. At first, she thought it was left by a neighbor, perhaps an emergency supply dropped on the road. Then she saw it, a faded scrap of embroidered thread, Aisha Thompson. Her breath caught. That name had haunted her mother's nightmares. She called for Marlene, lowering her voice so no wind would carry the words. "Mom, come outside." When Marlene reached her, she stared at the blanket, heart lurching. She scrambled to pick it up, but as soon as her fingers brushed the threads, she felt bile rise in her throat. She clamped her hand over her mouth, found her breathing ragged. "We need to call someone," said, the pink blanket clutched to her chest. Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't know why that name felt so familiar. She only knew it tore at her heart. Within 2 hours, the Duluth Sheriff's Office had dispatched 2 deputies and a detective, Detective Mark Levine, who happened to be a former pediatric unit consultant. When Levine saw the pink blanket, every alarm in his mind screamed. He recognized the fine cotton weave. St. Mary's had standardized those blankets for years. "This came from that hospital," he said gravely. By 6 p.m., a snow-plowed path led to the Devons house. Inside, sat on the couch, shaking under a blanket, while Marlene sipped tea with pinned-back hair and wide, wild eyes. Detective Levine and 2 uniformed deputies stormed in. Levine held up the blanket. "Who do you think you are? What is this?" Marlene collapsed into a chair. I don't know how this got out there. I have no idea." She shook, gaze darting from the blanket to her daughter. M's face turned pale. Levine saw the resemblance. M's dark eyes, her gentle chin, the same swirl of dark hair at the crown. He let out a low whistle. "This ends tonight. I'm taking that blanket as evidence. We're searching everywhere." They drove back to the mobile command post, an insulated trailer fitted with fluorescent lights and a small kitchenette. where backup deputies had set up X-ray equipment and a laptop for logging evidence. Inside, Dr. Angela Ruiz and her team were waiting. She wore a lab coat and a crisp expression that suggested nothing escaped her notice. When Levine handed over the cap, she nodded. "We'll swab for any traces of blood, sweat, or tissue. We'll run mitochondrial DNA or any other suitable analysis. But first, we need a sample from the original bone fragment that was discovered alongside the hat." A second piece of evidence arrived, a bone fragment recovered from Eagle Creek back in 2003. Levine produced it and placed it under Dr. Ruiz's portable X-ray to confirm its dimensions and assess its integrity. "We'll bag that separately. We'll keep it cold and send to the main lab in Reno for full DNA analysis," she explained. Levine peeled open a seal on a small evidence bag and drew out Marlene's pink baby blanket. "We believed it would be a dead end," he admitted to Sarah and Mark, who arrived soon after, driven from Duluth by panic and love. "Instead, we have the missing infant's blanket." Sarah's knees buckled. That's my blanket." Her voice cracked. Who? Levine placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Based on the baby blanket's design and tags, we can confirm this came from St. Eunice Mary's in 1995. We recovered it under the snow. We have reason to believe the missing infant, Aisha Thompson, is present here." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mark's eyes widened. Marlene's breakdown. That same night, Marlene sat in a patience-thin interview room at the Duluth Police Department. Tiny, windowless, lit by a single fluorescent bulb that flickered overhead. Detective Levine and Detective Sarah Mullins faced her over a gray table. She cradled a blanket in her lap, head bowed. Mullins slid 2 photos across the table, one of newborn Aisha, cresting onto Sarah's first photograph in room 314, head wrapped in that pink blanket. The other of Emily Claire as a toddler, grinning before a Christmas tree in a pink corduroy dress. Marlene's jaw quivered. She wiped sweat from her brow. I never meant to hurt her. I wanted a baby so badly. I saw her crying. She was so innocent." Detective Mullins leaned in. "So you stole her?" Marlene's shoulders shook. "I loved her as my own. I raised her like a daughter. I gave her every toy I could afford. Do you know what it was like to grieve every night, imagining her tiny face? To lose your only child, Clara, and never heal?" Levine closed his eyes briefly, empathy flickering in his stern expression. "That's no excuse. You turned a newborn's life into a lie." Marlene's tears fell faster. "I couldn't give her back. I thought if I gave her back, I'd lose the only thing I had left of Clara. I watched her learn to walk, heard her first words, Mama, the same word my Clara had said when she was young. I convinced myself that I was saving her from a world that felt cruel." Mullins tapped a file on the table, a birth certificate reading Aisha Thompson, born June 12, 1995, St. Mary's Hospital. "You forged this to claim she was your niece," Mullins said. "You threatened the foster home's director. You fabricated medical records. You raised her in complete deception. 15 years of lies." Marlene nodded, tears streaming. "I'm sorry." Levine stood. "I'm placing you under arrest for kidnapping and child endangerment." The bailiff cuffed her wrists. Marlene's head fell forward, and she was led away, sobbing, as the detectives watched. Emily Claire, A Conversation in the Storm. Meanwhile, Em sat on a small cot in a hospital examination room, trembling as Detective Levine sat across from her in plain clothes. A nurse in scrubs hovered behind her, ready to take her away. Em's eyes were red-rimmed, her blonde hair tangled. She wore a pink hoodie, her favorite color, of course, but now it felt like a shroud. "Emily Claire," Levine began gently. We believe your biological name is Aisha Thompson." Her breath hitched. "No," she stammered. "My name is Emily Claire Watson. You have the wrong person." He pressed a photograph from baby books taken by Marlene in 1998, Aisha's newborn picture. Em's hands trembled as she took it. The round baby face, the tiny dimple, the unexpected swirl of hair, it was unmistakable. "That's me," she whispered. He nodded. "Marlene Davenport is your aunt by adoption. She took you from St. Mary's 15 years ago today. She changed your birth records to present you as her niece born at St. Joseph's Hospital in Duluth. We recovered the blanket that identified your original name. Your DNA matches that of your birth mother, Sarah Thompson, with 99.9% certainty." Em's world narrowed to a pinpoint of agony. But she was my mother. She loved me." He continued softly. "Yes, she raised you lovingly, but you belong with your birth family. Right now, you can choose what you wish to do next. We can call your birth parents tonight if you'd like." Tears streamed down her face as she dialed a number she had saved months earlier, Sarah Thompson's cell. Sarah answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Levine from Duluth PD. We believe we have your daughter." On the other end, Sarah took a long breath. My daughter? My baby?" Levine replied. "She is safe, physically unharmed, though understandably distraught. She is with me now." Minutes later, Em's tearful voice came through the speaker. "Mom?" Sarah whispered. "Aisha, is it really you?" "Yes, it's me. 15 years. Her voice broke. Sarah's tears fell onto her phone screen. "I have missed you every day of my life. I will come get you." Em's whisper. "Mom." The reunion, a family reunited. That same night, Sarah and Mark Thompson, her ex-husband, who still carried the pain of losing their daughter, drove north on Interstate 35. Mark had flown in from his new job in Madison to accompany Sarah. They navigated through swirling snow, headlights cutting arcs through whiteout conditions. The car's heater rattled as they held hands in silence. "You should drive," Mark said. "I can't focus on the road. I'm too nervous." Sarah nodded, gripping the wheel. "I need to see her, to hold her." 4 hours later, at 2 p.m., they arrived at the Duluth Police Department. Snow clogged the driveway. Sarah stepped out, boots crunching, breath steaming. She wrapped a thick coat around her shoulders and marched inside, where Detective Levine led her down a silent corridor to the interview room, where Em sat, head bowed, hugging a pink blanket like a shield. When Em looked up at her mother, the resemblance was unmistakable. The small, upturned nose, those big, curious brown eyes, the same swirl of dark hair at the crown. Em's face shone with tears. Sarah dropped to her knees in front of her. "Aisha, my Aisha," she whispered, trembling. She stretched her arms, and Em rose, stepping forward to collapse into her mother's embrace. Sarah felt a fierce wave of relief and pain wash through her. Pain for every day she hadn't held her. Relief that she was safe now. They clung to each other for a long moment, while Mark stood a few feet away, tears streaming down his cheeks. He approached slowly, unsure whether to intrude on that moment. Sarah felt his arms slip around her shoulders. She nodded at Em. "That's your father." Em turned, and Mark dropped to one knee before her. "Aisha," he whispered, a name he had barely dared to speak in years. She looked up, her eyes wide. "Daddy?" Mark extended his arms. She hesitated for a second, then took that final step and let herself break into his embrace. Mark bowed his head, tears soaking the collar of his jacket. Off to the side, Detective Levine and Detective Mullins quietly slipped out, leaving the family to their reunion. Learning the truth. Over the next several days, M, now again called Aisha Thompson, lived with Sarah and Mark in a small lakefront cottage Sarah had rented near the hospital. She slept in a nursery painted pale yellow, with a crib now filled with stuffed animals instead of a sleeping infant. Sarah had recovered all of Aisha's baby pictures, nursery moments saved in scrapbooks scattered on a desk, and showed them to her daughter. At first, Aisha asked few questions. She observed her reflection in the mirror. Long dark hair, now 15, instead of the blonde pigtails she'd known. Sarah sat with her for hours, showing ultrasound images, birth announcement photos, father's hand pressing gently against mother's belly. Aisha's eyes filled with tears as she recognized that baby, herself. In a gentle voice, Sarah explained, "When you were born, Nurse Davenport took you. She told us you died, but she lied. She raised you as her own. I never stopped looking, even though I thought I'd never see you again." Tears dripped down Aisha's cheeks. "I don't know how to feel," she whispered. "I loved her, but she took you away." Sarah nodded, voice quivering. "I know, it was wrong, but you are my daughter. You always were." Mark knelt in front of her. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I never stopped hoping for you." Aisha's head dropped. "I thought I was your daughter. I'm sorry I called her Moni." Sarah pulled her close. "You did what you had to do. She raised you. She gave you her love. But now you're home. We will never leave you again." Confronting the past, courtroom and confession. 2 days later, in a small courtroom outside Duluth, Marlene Davenport stood alone in the defendant's box. She wore a gray suit, eyes red from crying. Judge Anderson, a graying man with gentle features, read the charges: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and forging state records. Her public defender sat beside her, but Marlene's guilt was unmistakable in every tremble of her lips. Sarah and Mark sat in the front row, with Aisha on Sarah's lap. Aisha looked at Miss Davenport, tears in her eyes. "How could you?" she whispered. Marlene stood when the bailiff called her name. She spoke in a quiet, broken voice. "Your Honor, I plead guilty. I took that child because I had lost my own. I know I can never undo my crime. I loved her, and I hurt her. I'm sorry." The judge looked at her sternly. "You stole a life. You will serve 15 years for the kidnapping, plus 10 years for forgery. However, your guilty plea spares the victim's family the ordeal of a full trial. Sentence will be served concurrently." Marlene nodded, lip quivering. She was led away in handcuffs, head bent, as the bailiff opened the cell door. After the hearing, Sarah and Aisha returned to the courthouse hallway. A small group of reporters waited. Sarah looked at Marlene's retreating figure. She felt no triumph, only a hollowness. She held Aisha's hand, guiding her past the cameras. That evening, they gathered at a quiet diner. Aisha picked at a plate of mashed potatoes. The overhead fluorescent lights reflected off the vinyl tables. Sarah reached across, gently tapping her daughter's hand. "I know you need time," she said. "You can ask me anything, at your own pace." Aisha sighed. "I feel angry, grateful, confused. I love you both, but I also loved her, my only mother for 15 years." Mark nodded. "It's okay to feel that way. You're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to cry. You can be whoever you need to be." They sat in silence, the hum of the diner around them. Outside, the wind howled, a reminder that winter hadn't loosened its grip on Duluth. But inside, warmth spread between them, rebuilding trust and life together. Over the next several weeks, Aisha began weekly therapy sessions with a child psychologist, Dr. Leela Cheng, who specialized in identity trauma. She taught coping tools, journaling, breathing exercises, and encouraged Aisha to share her memories of Marlene, not to villainize her completely, but to understand the love and fear intertwined. Sarah and Mark attended family therapy once a month. They worked on building trust, simple routines like shared breakfasts, bedtime stories, movie nights. They took long walks by Lake Superior, discussing unanswered questions. Who contacted the nurse who recognized the blanket under the snow? How had Marlene faked the records so well? And most urgently, how would Aisha finish high school? Aisha's sophomore year had just begun. She was behind in credits, had to transfer to a new school in Duluth, and struggled socially. Her accent was a mixture of Minnesotan and something quieter, unfamiliar to her classmates. In October 2010, she joined the high school orchestra, sharing violin practice with students half her age. Music became her refuge, a place where her emotions could flow without words. That December, the Thompson home glowed with holiday lights. Sarah and Mark decorated a tall artificial tree with ornaments, some homemade, some from their marriage years ago. Aisha wrapped presents in pastel paper, laughing with Mark as they tangled tinsel in her hair. It was the first holiday they were truly a family again. On Christmas morning, Aisha opened a gift from her grandfather, a framed photograph of her as a newborn. The image showed Sarah's tender gaze, Mark's proud grin, the pink blanket that once lay in a hospital bassinet. Tears streamed down her face. She hugged her mother. "Thank you," she whispered. "I feel like I know who I am again." Sarah kissed her forehead. "You always have been who you are, sweetheart. An extended family and a new purpose." In July 2011, for the 16th anniversary of Aisha's disappearance, the Thompsons returned to Minneapolis. They booked a small house near St. Mary's Hospital. Sarah insisted on visiting room 314, now converted into a private nursing suite, just to say a final goodbye to the place that shattered her life. Aisha, a sophomore in high school, was curious but nervous. They approached the building at dawn. The sky was a pale blue wash. A nurse in green scrubs slipped out a side door, offering a brief nod as they passed. The parking lot was nearly empty. Sarah led them inside quietly, past reception to the original wing. A plaque hung on the wall, in memory of infant victims of abduction, dedicated to preventing future tragedies. Sarah closed her eyes as they reached the formerly numbered 314 space, a plain gray door marked private. She placed her hand against the metal. "I will never forget you, my sweet baby," she whispered. Aisha stood beside her, faint scars of childhood trauma in her posture, but firm. She slipped her arm around her mother's waist. "I'm here," she said softly. "I always was." They left a single white rose against the wall and walked away in silent solidarity. Over the next year, Sarah expanded Aisha's Light Foundation into the Second Chance Network, focusing on reunification services for children recovered after long absences, matching forensic psychologists, social workers, and legal aid. She raised funds to buy digital baby monitors, improve newborn ID systems, and create a national registry for abduction recovery. In 2012, the foundation published a guidebook, Found at Last, A Survivor's Journey, co-written by Sarah, Mark, and Aisha, describing the emotional and legal steps required to reintegrate a child into her birth family after extended separation. They gave lectures at child welfare conferences nationwide. In every audience, they saw nodding heads, tears, and determined faces. More families reunited, policies shifted in major hospitals. The second reunion anniversary, June 12, 2015. June 12, 2015 marked 20 years since Aisha's birth and her abduction. The Thompsons hosted a small memorial event at a lakeside park near Superior, Wisconsin, where they scattered flower petals in the water to honor all missing children and celebrate reunions. Aisha, now 19, stood in a flowing white summer dress, holding a single white rose. She spoke into a microphone. "I never thought I would be standing here. You hear stories, children lost, never found. I was one of the lucky ones. I grew up loving my adoptive mother, but never knowing my real story. Finding my birth mother and father, it was the greatest gift I have ever received. Today, I honor the child I once was, and the family I will always be. Thank you to everyone who supported my mother's search, especially Nurse Emily Ruiz, Detective Levine, and my grandmother, Ms. Peterson, who fostered me for the first year. Thank you all for giving me a second chance at life." Sarah wept in the front row as the crowd applauded. Mark sat beside her, tears glinting in his eyes. A small group of adoptive family members and restored siblings circled them, sharing hugs. A breeze skimmed the lake, scattering petals like confetti of hope. Full circle, the present day. By 2020, Aisha, now 24, graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in social work. She returned to Duluth to work as a caseworker for families coping with child loss. Her days were spent at hospitals, counseling mothers of preemies, educating new parents about infant safety. Her passion was rooted in her own experience and her family's resilience. Sarah, over 60 now, stepped back from daily operations at the Second Chance Network, but remained its honorary chair. She spent her days writing op-eds on child welfare, consulting with lawmakers in St. Paul. She and Mark lived quietly by Lake Superior in the little cottage Marlene had once seen as home. They had remarried each other 2 years ago, strengthening the bond formed by their shared journey. In 2018, Nurse Emily Ruiz, racked with guilt for 15 years, pursued a new career as a therapist specializing in grief counseling. She often worked with families of missing infants, drawing from her own remorse to connect. At a foundation fundraiser, Emily joined Sarah and Aisha on stage. Sarah reached out and hugged her, tears flowing. "You did lose me once," Sarah said quietly, "but you've helped save so many since. Thank you." Emily nodded, hugging her back. "I will carry that guilt forever, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to do good." Concluding reflection. On the evening of June 12, 2025, 30 years since that fateful June morning, St. Mary's Hospital held a memorial for every child ever abducted from its care. A white marble plaque now hung in the main foyer. "In remembrance of all infants who have gone missing from this hospital, may their stories remind us of the fragility of trust and the power of hope." Beneath it was a large field of daisies, Aisha's favorite flower, planted by Sarah's foundation. Each bloom represented a child, a family, a promise that no parent walks alone in grief. Sarah and Mark drove up from Duluth, with Aisha by their side. Aisha, now a woman of 30, reached out and touched the plaque. She wore a simple turquoise dress. Her eyes shone as she surveyed the daisies and thought of the life she had led during those 15 stolen years. She knelt, placing a single white rose in front of her name, etched among 20 tiny brass plates. A hush fell in the foyer as she spoke softly, voice carried on a breath. "To whoever reads this, know that love can survive even the darkest abduction. I was lost, but I was never abandoned. My mother's heart never stopped calling me. Today, I stand in gratitude to all who searched, to everyone who believed I was alive. I will honor my second chance by helping other families find their own." As she rose, the overhead lights cast rays across her face. Outside, The June sun dipped low, gilding the city skyline. In that moment, life felt like a bridge between sorrow and hope, fragile, luminous, and infinite.